Hi, I'm Lynsey Harrison, and I'm the head of Clarion's Contentious Private Client team. And I'm here today with Jacob, who's the solicitor in the team. Hi, Jacob.
Hi.
Hi. So we've previously talked, and you've given us a really helpful overview of Proprietary Estoppel and what it is and how it works. But today we're going to look at it in a bit more depth, just to look at a couple of the key elements to those types of actions. And specifically, we're going to be looking at assurance and detriment. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because, we seem to find currently that they're some of the most contested issues in these types of claims.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So let's start with assurance.
Yes.
We know that a claimant needs to show that they were given a clear assurance or promise that they would receive an interest in the land or property, is the wording. But what does that actually mean? What counts as valid assurance?
Yep, so the courts have made it clear that the assurance doesn't necessarily need to be documented or even verbal, although often it is. It can actually be implied through conduct. So these can be gestures or actions from the landowner made to the claimant over the years. And a good case to illustrate that is Fauna and Major. This involved a farmer who'd spent years working on his cousin's farm for little or no pay, on the basis that he would inherit it when the landowner died. And although the landowner never actually explicitly told him that he would inherit the farm, over the years he'd made various gestures and comments, done things such as handing him the insurance documents relating to the farm, which obviously suggested to the claimant that he would inherit it down the line.
Yeah.
This was not the case after the landowner died, and the claimant brought the claim, and the House of Lords ruled that the gestures and implied conduct were enough to constitute a valid assurance, because in the context, those gestures had enough meaning to constitute that.
Yeah, because the key point is it just has to be clear and unambiguous, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Well, that's really interesting, and so it's not just what's said. It's also that how it can be reasonably be understood in the context, isn't it?
Yeah. So what might seem like something that's vague and wouldn't constitute an assurance in one context may well do in another, and the court will look at the relationship between the parties and often the length of the relationship as well.
What about cases where the assurance is more ambiguous? Are there any examples where a claim's failed because the assurance just wasn't clear enough?
Yeah. So there's one case called Joyce and Epsom and Ewell Borough Council. In that case, the claimant, it was to do with land that was owned by a council. He believed that an assurance had been made that he should receive that land, but the court found that the promises were too vague and uncertain to count as an assurance. And the court ruled there was no enforceable promise, so his claim failed.
Yeah, he just misunderstood, hadn't he?
Yes,
completely. Yeah. And that shows how important it is for the assurance to be really specific. So thanks for that. And then moving on to detriment, what kind of things can amount to detriment in these types of cases?
So the court's really looking for the claimant to have relied on the assurance and then through those actions actually suffered some kind of loss. And the typical one is the farmer working on the farm for little or no pay for the majority of their life, but the detriment can also be financial and through loss of opportunities. So they may have turned down potential careers or job opportunities throughout their life, on the lines of that promise.
Yeah. Or investing money in a property that they thought they were going to get.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And a good case to illustrate that is Gillett and Holt. And Mr. Gillett, the claimant in this case, had worked on a farm for over 40 years on the understanding that he'd inherit it. He turned down other job opportunities, structured his whole life around this eventual promise that he would receive the farm, and this didn't come to light. And the court found that the length of time he'd worked on the farm, around 40 years, was sufficient to show enough detriment, and his claim was successful.
That case is a really good example, actually, of where someone genuinely relied on a promise, and they've ended up in a really bad position where it's been broken. So are there cases where a claim's failed because the claimant just couldn't prove detriment?
So one example would be Bradbury and Taylor, where the claimants moved into a property on the understanding that they would eventually inherit it. But when the court actually looked at the course of action after they move into the property, they'd never invested any real significant sums into the property or made any sacrifices on reliance of that promise. So their claim failed on the basis that they've not actually suffered any meaningful detriment.
Yeah. So the key takeaway is that it's not enough to just have a promise made. You have to show that you have suffered a real tangible detriment as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And the court's looking for some kind of meaningful disadvantage that the claimant suffered on reliance of the promise.
And that's something that people really need to be aware of, isn't it, before they take a claim. Before we finish, what's practical advice that you would give to families who are in this type of situation? How can they try to prevent getting involved in these types of disputes?
Yeah. So communication is one big thing. So for families or whoever is involved in a person making a promise to give away land or pass on land, to have open conversations about that, and then following that to make sure that they actually document any promises that are made or any assurances that are given for the protection of the people making the promise, because it can be their estates that are eroded in years of disputes and costs, and also for the person relying on the promise to ensure that whatever detriment they're suffering, they actually end up receiving what they're expecting at the end of it.
And in all of these types of scenarios, succession planning, something that our private client team deal with day to day, is absolutely critical, isn't it? Because if you're planning for this type of situation, you can get rid of a lot of the types of disputes that we see. And in a lot of situations, if more planning had been done, they wouldn't then be involved in the disputes that we see on a daily basis.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you so much for joining me, Jacob. No problem. That was really helpful. Thank you. And as always, if you or someone you know is involved in this type of situation and needs some help, please do get in touch. Thanks for watching.